Hi everyone, I'm Yandziak. I am from Google Cloud. This is one of the first talks where I'm doing a lot of these things here, newbie users onboarding to Helm. I'm typically not a newbie, so I get to claim ignorance and incompetence. It's wonderful. I'm typically not a user. I'm usually a customer engineer from Google Cloud, so I'm not representing the vendor here. I've taken away all my beautiful Google Cloud template slides here, gratuitously stolen from the Helm website to have my little slide template here. I just want to talk a little bit about my quick onboarding to Helm as a customer engineer. Now, what's a customer engineer? It used to be called a sales engineer. Most of you are probably familiar with that from just the standard industry term. It's kind of expanded within scope within Google Cloud. We're with you from your first conversation all the way through your time of production, so we can, on any given day, help you with just initial conversation and discovery work and architecture design up through implementation and all the way through support if something breaks in production. I'm also a team lead for a number of customer engineers in San Francisco. So on any given day, I'm working with up to 100 customers across many different verticals, from tiny startups to large legacy enterprises. Being in San Francisco, a lot of them are cutting edge tech companies, but we also have ones that are a little bit behind in the technology that they use. And I'm not a complete newbie with Kubernetes. Prior to my role as a customer engineer, I was on our professional services team, embedded on site with a few different customers who are doing some of our largest Kubernetes deployments on a day-to-day basis, and particularly one large retailer that we went through Black Friday with, where we gained a lot of battle scars there. That said, up until KubeCon of last year, I had not heard of Helm. I actually heard of it when Vic Iglesias, who's up there in his VIP section, because apparently he's a celebrity and everyone has to call him out today. Vic, sorry I don't have a giant picture of you, but I will next time. He gave a talk at KubeCon, my colleague, and talked about Helm. I said, that's pretty interesting. Maybe that's something I should know about. And then a lot of the folks within the greater community of Kubernetes that I follow on Twitter, a lot of people in this room kept on talking about it. And folks like Vic within Google kept on posting solution guides about it. Now, myself as a customer engineer, I'm responsible for everything that we have on the truck at Google Cloud Platform. From one meeting to the other, I'm talking about machine learning, to big data, to databases, to networking, to load balancers, to Kubernetes. I probably spend, or any given customer engineer spends about 10% of their time on Kubernetes topics and 0.1% of their time on Helm. I myself am a Kubernetes specialist within our team, so I want to be at least conversationally fluent in the high-level concepts and architecture of a tool like Helm, so I can, when talking with customers, at least understand what they're looking for, and when something goes over my head, I can point them to someone like Vic who can take over from there. So I'm just looking for any given technology, something like Helm, if I can spend 7-8 hours with it, go through the quick start, go through the onboarding, go through a few tutorials, and just understand the high-level concepts and architecture, so I know how to talk about it intelligently, and I don't have a deer-in-the-headlights look when someone brings that up in a conversation with me, and I know how to intelligently route those requests. So what did I do? You guys have a great quick start guide for Helm, and I'll talk about what that quick start guide covers and what it doesn't, but I went through that. On my own MacBook here, did a homebrew install, ran Helm init on a Kubernetes cluster that I have running for test purposes at all time, and everything was up and running. I installed 3-4 different packages, and that whole process took about 45 minutes. And it was all super smooth, it was all super easy. I wouldn't have a whole lot to talk about if I did only that, so I kind of went beyond that. One thing I did was a tutorial that someone on my team had committed to our GCP tutorial community on adding an Nginx ingress to a Kubernetes cluster. He had a whole bunch of YAML files, and that went to review to Vic and myself, some other folks, and Vic says, why don't you just make that a Helm chart? He said, well, wait a minute, this is for educational purposes. I really like my YAML files, I spent a lot of time on them. If this is a Helm chart, this becomes like a 2-line tutorial. We eventually convinced him to move over. The tutorial ended up talking a little about Helm and how to install it and how to run it. And the folks that are going through the tutorial focus more on the configuration and the operation of Nginx and the ingress itself versus the inner plumbing of Kubernetes, which was great. So far, so good, but that wasn't enough to go through it. So I read through all the Helm documentation on the website and went on a couple different blog posts and podcasts that I saw out in the community. And then I talked to Vic and said, I did the basics, everything worked well, I didn't hate anything, I don't have anything to really bash here. What do I do next? And he says, why don't you take the Kubernetes guestbook, which most people are familiar with, the example, and convert it over to a chart. At that point, being a lazy sales guy, I Googled for it and found out actually someone had already submitted the guestbook example to be a chart. And it was already there, looked 100% ready to go, but no one had approved it and given that looks good to me. And why? They were submitting it to the community chart. And for whatever reason up until this point, I didn't realize that there's a difference between community charts and people having their own chart repositories. And that this community charts is really only this set of 150, super popular, approved, off-the-shelf SaaS providers that put stuff out there. I had imagined this was something like a Docker Hub where I could just push that out and people would be able to access that. So I found out that I actually had to host my own repository and do a lot of more manual things to get up my own charts. And that's where these additional use cases came up. I saw there's a talk tomorrow called Over Helm. This is where I began to feel a little overwhelmed myself. And the main message I want to get across is Helm, for the customers that I serve and the use cases that they have, and for myself being a customer engineer, where the most I'll do in coding is just a demo or a proof of concept or a workshop of a couple hours where it's just very basic use cases and very popular packages, it is ridiculously easy and awesome for me. If I want to do anything beyond that, and if I want to understand kind of the inner workings, from the documentation alone and without knowing a lot of people in this room and without having seen these talks, Helm is a little bit confusing, and it actually means a lot of different things to different people. So the easy part that I got through in 45 minutes of installing a Helm client, getting that tiller server up with Helm init, pulling some charts, creating a release for those charts, and then interacting with those charts, whether it's customizing parameters or doing application lifecycle things like deleting, upgrading, and rollback, that's awesome. Now when I go on to this, we're going to talk about hardening Helm for production, or building a Helm chart myself, whether that's public or private, creating and hosting a Helm repository where I have to run my own HTTP server, or actually I'd only heard about things today such as Chart Museum, which is not listed in the documentation because it's not a native Helm component, but it's actually out there within the vendor community, are really the most interesting things and the coolest stories that I've seen this morning from different customers is when you really hook this up to the deployment pipeline and have some CI/CD services. Within the documentation natively as this serves today, there's not a lot around these. It sounds like this is being done in pockets and there's a lot of tribal knowledge out there. But if you want to go to the documentation and the Helm website, understand at a high level what is the architecture, how these things relate together, how is this being used in production, and what are the best practices, a lot of it is mixed together between different use cases, and it's also mixed together with the folks that are, most of the people in this room, the maintainers themselves. And that's when it occurred to me that you have a lot of different user profiles, and some of them are represented here, some of them are not. So what I often represent, either myself doing demos and workshops or interacting with customers, are these app developers. They're just doing those basics, everything that's super easy within 45 minutes of releasing app lifecycle and customization. And then there's different things out there. If I want to harden my Kubernetes and do a lot of the things that Locke was talking about with security, there's great documentation there. That is so far so good. But once it gets into chart repositories and publishing my own charts, things get a little dicier in terms of understanding from the documentation alone, and you really have to kind of learn by doing. And then if I want to go one step further and put that into a deployment pipeline, obviously there's tons of CI and CD tools out there. You can't cover that in with your own native documentation, and different cloud providers and different vendors of these tools will have their own workshops. But it's hard to tell when a customer comes to me, what are the best practices or what are the standards, what are the most used tools within this ecosystem, and how do most people do this? Beyond going to one blog post or another and not knowing which ones are the most recommended ones, it's tough to know where to go from there. There are some blog posts listed on the native Helm documentation. Some are even on the front page. Some are on the related articles. And it's not clear if there's rhyme or reason to which ones get on there and which ones don't, or if it's just ultimately who contributed there. And then what really happens, and it seems that the documentation is mostly written by and for these last two, which most of the folks here in this room are the maintainers themselves and the people that are building tools on top of this to fuel that ecosystem. So at the end of the day, I think that the documentation could be a little bit more organized in terms of these user profiles, where again, probably in my mind, 95% of the people that are using Helm are in this first category, and they go here and they see, if you click on using Helm, you'll see things from each of these different user profiles. And it's all kind of mixed together where if you want to do a chart repository or do your own chart or deployment pipeline, you kind of have to pick and choose from different areas. And again, there's not really an initial introduction of these are the high-level concepts, this is the architecture, and these are like the 80-20 just things you can learn in a couple hours to understand what Helm's about. So next steps, really, this I all wrote before coming in this morning. I was hoping to learn more about production use cases at scale, understand what the ecosystem tools are out there, listen to where Helm is going in terms of roadmap and vision, and figure out where people like myself can help and contribute. All that has been covered today pretty well, and looks like there's a lot more of it tomorrow. So my final message is it's a good thing that we have a Helm Summit to learn about all this, and I've had a great time with it so far. Thank you.